In March of 2015, a 71-year-old man sat alone in a bathroom. He did not know his microphone was still on. He had just been confronted with a piece of evidence that linked him to a murder, and now he was talking to himself, mumbling into the mirror. And then he said it. Killed them all, of course. 6 words, whispered to his own reflection, captured on a hot mic during the filming of an HBO documentary. The man in that bathroom was Robert Durst, heir to one of the largest real estate empires in New York City, a fortune worth more than $100 million. Over the span of 20 years, 3 people connected to Robert Durst had died or disappeared. His wife vanished in 1982. Her body was never found. His best friend was shot execution-style in her home in the year 2000. His elderly neighbor was killed and dismembered in 2001. And for decade after decade, Robert Durst walked free. He had money. He had powerful lawyers. He had a lifetime of practice at running from consequences. He had even lived as a mute woman wearing a wig and women's clothing to avoid detection. But in that bathroom with the mic still rolling, he finally told the truth. This is the story of a man born into extraordinary wealth who left a trail of bodies across 3 states and 3 decades, and the bizarre chain of events that finally brought him down. Robert Allen Durst was born on April 12, 1943, in New York City. His family was not just wealthy. They were a dynasty. The Durst organization was one of the most powerful real estate families in Manhattan. Founded by Robert's grandfather Joseph Durst in 1927, the company owned and operated millions of square feet of prime commercial and residential property across Midtown. Office towers, apartment buildings, entire city blocks. By the time Robert was a boy, the family controlled some of the most valuable land in the world. But money did not buy Robert Durst a happy childhood. When he was 7 years old, his mother Bernice climbed to the roof of their home in Scarsdale, New York, and she fell, or she jumped. The family never said which. Robert later told people he watched it happen, that his father, Seymour Durst, woke him in the middle of the night and pointed to the roof where his mother stood before she fell to her death. Whether that memory is accurate or a fabrication has never been confirmed. Seymour Durst denied it. Robert's siblings denied it. But Robert told the story again and again throughout his life. What is confirmed is that Bernice Durst died that night, and the family never spoke of it again. There was no grief, no therapy, no explanation given to the children, just silence. Seymour Durst was cold and domineering. He raised Robert and his 3 younger siblings with rigid expectations and no warmth. Robert was the eldest son, the presumptive heir, the one who was supposed to carry the family name forward. But Seymour never trusted him. He saw something in Robert that unsettled him. A detachment, a flatness behind the eyes, an inability to connect with other people in any genuine way. Robert attended Lehigh University and then pursued a graduate degree at UCLA. He drifted. He struggled to find his place within the family business. As the years passed, the tension between father and son became a permanent fracture. And in 1994, Seymour made a decision that stunned everyone. He passed control of the Durst organization not to Robert, but to his younger brother Douglas. Robert was humiliated. He had spent decades expecting to lead the family empire. Instead, he was sidelined, cut out, replaced by his little brother. Robert received a trust fund and a financial settlement. He would never want for money. But the rejection by his father defined the rest of his life. It confirmed what Robert Durst may have already believed, that the rules did not apply to him, that loyalty meant nothing, and that he answered to no one. In 1973, Robert Durst married Kathleen McCormick. She went by Kathy. She was a dental hygienist from Long Island. She was 20 years old, bright and ambitious and full of energy. Friends described her as warm and outgoing with a wide smile and a trusting nature. She came from a working-class Irish Catholic family. She had 4 brothers who adored her. She was not from the world of Manhattan real estate dynasties. But she fell in love with Robert Durst, and he seemed to fall in love with her. The early years of the marriage appeared stable enough. They lived in a penthouse on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. They spent weekends at a lakeside cottage in South Salem, New York, about an hour north of the city. They had money. They had social access. From the outside, it looked like a good life. But behind closed doors, the marriage was deteriorating. Kathy told friends that Robert was controlling and unpredictable, that he would fly into rages without warning, that he grabbed her, that he shoved her, that he would become physically violent and then act as though nothing had happened the next morning. She confided in her close friends that she was afraid of him. By the early 1980s, Kathy had enrolled in medical school at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx. She was building a life outside of Robert. She was pulling away. She was becoming independent. And Robert Durst did not tolerate being left. Friends later recalled that the abuse escalated as Kathy grew more confident. On the evening of January 31st, 1982, Robert and Kathy Durst attended a dinner party at the home of friends in South Salem, New York. Witnesses said they argued during the evening. Robert appeared agitated. After the party, Robert said he drove Kathy to the train station in Katina so she could take the train back to their apartment in Manhattan. That was his story. He said she took the 9:17 train. He said he called her later that night at their Manhattan apartment, and she answered. He said he never saw her again. Kathy McCormick Durst was 29 years old when she vanished. She was in her 4th year of medical school, just months from becoming a doctor. She had a circle of friends who loved her, for brothers who were desperate to find her. And she was gone, just like that. No body, no crime scene, no witnesses who saw her board that train. The initial investigation was handled by the New York State Police and the Westchester County District Attorney. Robert Durst was the obvious and immediate suspect. He was the last person known to have seen her alive. He had a documented history of violence against her, and his story had serious problems. The doorman at their Manhattan apartment building on Riverside Drive said Kathy never arrived that night. There was no record of her on the train. The phone call Robert claimed to have made could not be verified. But the Durst family had money and influence and access to the best attorneys in New York. Robert hired lawyers. He stopped cooperating with investigators, and the case stalled. In 1982, without a body and without physical evidence, the investigation went nowhere. The case went cold. For 35 years, Kathy was simply listed as a missing person. She was finally declared legally dead in 2017. Her body has never been found. Susan Berman was a writer living in Los Angeles. She was the daughter of David Berman, a Las Vegas mob figure who had helped run the Flamingo Hotel in its early days alongside Bugsy Siegel. Susan grew up in that world. She understood power and secrecy and the unspoken rules of people who operated outside the law. She was tough. She was loyal. And she kept secrets for the people she loved. She met Robert Durst at UCLA in the late 1960s, and they became close friends. Best friends. The kind of friendship that lasted 30 years through marriages and divorces and cross-country moves. They talked on the phone constantly. They confided in each other. And when Kathy disappeared in 1982, it was Susan Berman who stepped in to help Robert. She spoke to investigators on his behalf. She vouched for his character. She served as an unofficial spokesperson. She helped him control the narrative. Some investigators believed she did more than that. They believed Susan Berman had provided a false alibi, that she had called the Albert Einstein Medical School the day after Kathy vanished and pretended to be Kathy calling in sick. If that was true, then Susan knew what had happened to Kathy, and she had helped cover it up. For nearly 20 years that arrangement held. Robert stayed free. Susan stayed quiet. But in late 1999, something changed. The Westchester County District Attorney's Office reopened the Kathleen Durst case. New investigators, fresh eyes, updated forensic technology, and they wanted to talk to Susan Berman. If Susan had lied for Robert in 1982, she was now trapped. She could tell the truth and expose him. She could stay silent and risk being charged as an accessory. Or she could ask Robert for money. According to people close to Susan, she was struggling financially. She had been leaning on Robert for cash for years, and some believed she was preparing to leverage what she knew. Robert Durst understood the danger. He knew that Susan was the one person alive who could connect him to Kathy's disappearance. She was the loose thread, and loose threads get pulled. On December 24, 2000, Susan Berman was found dead in her home in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. She had been shot once in the back of the head. Execution style. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. She had let her killer in. She had turned her back to them. Investigators believed she knew and trusted the person who pulled the trigger. Shortly before the murder, an anonymous letter had been mailed to the Beverly Hills Police Department. Inside was a single piece of paper with Susan Berman's address and a single word: cadaver. The handwriting on that note would later become one of the most critical pieces of evidence in the entire case, because whoever wrote it misspelled Beverly Hills. They wrote Beverly, Beverly, with an extra E. At the time, no one knew who had sent the letter, but that distinctive misspelling was a signature, and it would take 15 years to match it. When it finally was matched, it changed everything. After the murder of Susan Berman, the pressure on Robert Durst was mounting. Investigators in both New York and Los Angeles were circling the reopened Kathy Durst case, the unsolved Berman murder. His name was coming up in both. So Robert Durst did what he had always done when things got dangerous. He ran. In the fall of 2001, Robert Durst surfaced in Galveston, Texas, a faded beach town on the Gulf Coast, sun-bleached and rundown, the kind of place where people go to disappear. He rented a cheap apartment on Avenue K for $300 a month under a fake name. But the disguise went far beyond a false identity. Robert Durst was living as a woman. He called himself Dorothy Heir, the name of a real woman he had known in college. He wore a wig. He wore women's clothing. He stuffed his bra, and he pretended to be mute. He communicated with his landlord only through handwritten notes. A man worth over $100 million. One of the heirs to a Manhattan real estate dynasty, living in a $300 a month apartment in Galveston, Texas, dressed as a mute woman, writing notes to his landlord because he was pretending he could not speak. It would be absurd if it were not so sinister. His neighbor in the building was a 71-year-old man named Morris Black. Black was a loner, cantankerous and difficult. He and Durst became acquaintances. They spent time together. They were both isolated men living on the margins of a city that did not care about them. On September 28, 2001, Morris Black was killed. His body was dismembered, cut into pieces. The remains were stuffed into black garbage bags and dumped into Galveston Bay. Over the next several days, body parts began washing ashore. The torso, the legs, the arms, but not the head. The head of Morris Black was never recovered. Police traced the garbage bags and the crime scene back to the apartment building on Avenue K. They identified the tenant, and then they discovered who Dorothy Heir really was. Not a mute woman at all, but Robert Durst, New York real estate heir, a man already suspected in the disappearance of his wife and the execution-style murder of his best friend. Durst was arrested and charged with murder. His family posted $300,000 in bail, and then he vanished again. He jumped bail and disappeared. For 6 weeks, the FBI hunted for him. He was placed on their most wanted list, a nationwide manhunt for a millionaire fugitive. They finally found him in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, inside a Wegmans grocery store, shoplifting a chicken salad sandwich. The sandwich cost $5.49. Durst had $37,000 in cash sitting in his car in the parking lot. He had been living out of that car for weeks, driving from state to state. A man who could have bought the entire store, caught stealing a sandwich. At trial in Galveston in 2003, Durst's defense team made an extraordinary argument. They admitted that Durst killed Morris Black. They admitted that he dismembered the body, but they claimed it was self-defense. They said Black had come at Durst with a gun. that Durst wrestled the weapon away and shot Black during the struggle, and that he panicked afterward. He was afraid. He was already suspected in 2 other cases. He believed no one would believe it was an accident, so he cut the body apart and dumped it in the bay. The jury deliberated for 5 days, and on November 11th, 2003, Robert Durst was acquitted of murder. Acquitted. A man who admitted to killing and dismembering another human being was found not guilty. Because the head was never found, the prosecution could not prove the manner of death. They could not prove premeditation, and the jury accepted the self-defense story. Durst was convicted only of evidence tampering and bond jumping. He served less than 5 years in prison. He was released in 2005. It was the most brazen escape from justice yet, but the story was far from over. In 2010, a feature film called All Good Things was released. It starred Ryan Gosling as a character based on Robert Durst and Kirsten Dunst as a character based on Kathy. The movie was a fictionalized retelling of the disappearance and the murders that followed. It received mixed reviews, but it drew fresh public attention to the Durst case. And then something remarkable happened. Robert Durst contacted the filmmakers himself. He wanted to talk. He wanted to tell his side of the story. Most people suspected of 3 killings would have kept their distance. Durst did the opposite. He could not resist the spotlight. This caught the attention of Andrew Juricki. Juricki was a documentary filmmaker known for getting his subjects to reveal more than they intended. He had directed the award-winning 2003 documentary Capturing the Friedmans. He was meticulous. He was patient. And he knew how to make someone comfortable enough to incriminate themselves. Juricki approached Durst about sitting for a multi-part documentary series for HBO. Durst agreed. He signed on eagerly. Over the course of several years, Juricki conducted extensive on-camera interviews with Robert Durst. They met in hotels and offices and living rooms. They talked about Kathy, about Susan, about Morris Black, about Galveston, about everything. The result was the Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst, a 6-part HBO documentary series that premiered in February of 2015. It was a sensation. Millions of viewers watched as Robert Durst sat across from Juricki and told his version of events. He was charming at times, evasive at others. He blinked constantly, a nervous, involuntary blinking that made him look like he was malfunctioning. He burped during interviews. He contradicted himself. He could not keep his story straight. But the most devastating moment came in the final episode. The filmmakers had obtained a letter that Robert Durst had sent to Susan Berman years before her murder. An ordinary personal letter mailed to her home address. And on the envelope, Durst had written Beverly Hills. Except he had misspelled it. Beverly, Beverly, with an extra E. The same misspelling. The same handwriting. On the anonymous cadaver note that someone had sent to the Beverly Hills police before Susan's body was discovered. The 2 envelopes were placed side by side on camera. The handwriting was not just similar. It was virtually identical. The block letters, the spacing, the distinctive misspelling. It was the same person. Confronted with this evidence, Robert Durst appeared visibly shaken. He shifted in his chair. He asked for a break. He excused himself to the bathroom, and the microphone was still recording. Alone in that bathroom, Robert Durst began muttering, "There it is. You're caught." And then, "What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." The final episode of The Jinx aired on March 15th, 2015. But the day before it aired, Robert Durst was already in handcuffs. On March 14th, 2015, FBI agents arrested Durst at a Marriott hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana. He had been preparing to run one final time. In his hotel room, they found more than $100,000 in cash, a loaded Smith & Wesson revolver, a latex mask designed to alter his appearance, marijuana, and a laminated map with driving directions to Cuba. Robert Durst was 71 years old. He had been running from justice for over 30 years, but there was nowhere left to go. Robert Durst was charged with the first-degree murder of Susan Berman. The trial was delayed again and again. Legal motions, pretrial hearings, health complications, and then the COVID-19 pandemic shut the courts down entirely. When the trial finally began in March of 2021 in an Inglewood, California courtroom, Robert Durst was 78 years old. He arrived in a wheelchair. He appeared frail and diminished. His health was failing. He had been diagnosed with bladder cancer. He could barely speak above a whisper. But the prosecution had waited decades for this moment, and they were not going to let it slip away. Deputy District Attorney John Lewin presented a devastating case. He argued that Robert Durst killed Susan Berman on December 24, 2000 to prevent her from telling investigators what she knew about the disappearance of Kathy Durst. That Susan was the one person alive who could expose the lie at the center of his alibi. That she was preparing to cooperate with the renewed investigation. And that Robert Durst silenced her permanently with a single bullet to the back of the head. The cadaver note was the centerpiece of the prosecution. The matching handwriting. The identical misspelling of Beverly with an extra E. Forensic document examiners testified that the anonymous note and the personal letter Durst had sent to Susan Berman were written by the same person. The prosecution also played the hot mic confession from the Jinx. Killed them all, of course. They played it for the jury. They let those 6 words hang in the air. And they introduced evidence connecting Durst to all 3 deaths. The disappearance of Kathy, the murder of Susan, the killing and dismemberment of Morris Black. The prosecution argued this was a pattern, a man who eliminated anyone who threatened him. Durst's defense team pushed back hard. Attorney David Sharutin argued that the bathroom statement was taken out of context, that Durst was rambling, that he was rehearsing what he thought people would accuse him of, not confessing. They argued that the cadaver note could have been written by someone else, that the handwriting analysis was unreliable. The jury did not believe it. On September 17, 2021, after deliberating for approximately 7 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Robert Durst was found guilty of first-degree murder in the killing of Susan Berman. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the first time in nearly 40 years, Robert Durst was being held accountable. But the reckoning was not finished. In October of 2021, a grand jury in Westchester County, New York, handed down an indictment charging Robert Durst with the murder of Kathleen McCormick Durst. 39 years after she vanished, they were finally going to put him on trial for killing his wife. It was the moment Kathy's family had been waiting for since 1982. But Robert Durst would never face that trial. On January 10, 2022, Robert Durst died in a California prison hospital. He was 78 years old. The cause of death was cardiac arrest related to his numerous health problems. He died a convicted murderer, but only for one of the 3 people he destroyed. Kathy's family never got their day in court. The case was closed with his death. Kathleen McCormick Durst was 29 years old when she vanished. She was months away from becoming a doctor. She wanted to help people. She wanted a life beyond the one Robert Durst had trapped her in. Her body has never been found. Her brothers spent 40 years fighting for justice. They never stopped. Susan Berman was 55 when she was murdered. A writer, a daughter of the Las Vegas underworld. A loyal friend who kept the wrong man's secrets for far too long. That loyalty cost her everything. Morris Black was 71, a quiet and difficult man living alone in a cheap apartment in Galveston, Texas. He had the terrible luck of living next door to a fugitive. His head was never recovered. His family buried what remained. Robert Durst spent decades protected by wealth and privilege and a legal system that time and again failed to hold the powerful accountable. He dressed as a woman and lived as a fugitive. He was caught stealing a $5 sandwich with $37,000 in his car. He admitted on camera to dismembering a man, and a jury set him free. He confessed on a hot mic and still had to be hunted down in a hotel room with a gun and a mask and a map to Cuba. The Durst case is not just a true crime story. It is a story about what money can buy in America. It can buy silence. It can buy time. It can buy delay after delay after delay. It can buy the most skilled defense attorneys in the country. But in the end, it could not buy innocence. Because in that bathroom with the microphone still recording, Robert Durst told the only truth that ever mattered. Killed them all, of course. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing to Sublime Crime. We cover cases like this every week. Cases where the truth takes years or decades to surface, but eventually does. Thank you for watching.